Hi, Paul Thompson here. I'm going to make this a little bite-size example of my kind of thought processes behind writing a demo for Albion Solstice. Now you can see that I've only used 5 of the string articulations, and I've created something that is a very slow kind of drifting feel. The idea is to constantly play with suspension, tension and release. That's the theory. So first up, let's have a quick look at the tonality. Now, one thing which I have to point out is you can see here, this section which corresponds to this section here in the score, that Logic doesn't necessarily pick everything up and continue long notes that carry on. It does sometimes get a bit confused about that. And therefore, sometimes it can be the use of the sustain pedal that also makes things confusing. But on this occasion, that's not what's happening here. So this D at the top, you can see, actually continues all the way through to bar 29. So it carries on all the way through to here, while this other stuff is moving underneath it. So bear that in mind. However, we can look at the note starts and we can see what's going on. So let me very quickly talk you through that, and then we'll have a listen to the piece. So we're in a kind of open D. There's a kind of Dorian feel at the beginning. You see the E and the C here, moving here down to the C as well. That we're it's that kind of D, open D sound, but with a little hint of what might be C major, or might be A minor. It's actually C major, really, because even though you're hearing the A, the feeling of it dropping is really kind of going from the D to the C. So, but again, that's one of those things that is open to the interpretation of the listener. Here we've got a B natural, and we've got a few notes here that are suggesting a kind of suspended G over this stuff, also kind of reinforcing the D Dorian feel. But then as we go into this middle section and we introduce the C again, we have an E flat in here. Now, this makes things interesting because this is a very definite change. It's taking us out of what we thought was our key center, our kind of tonality, our mode, and introducing a foreign note. That's quickly followed up by this B flat here. And then eventually resolving to a D major, which is, again, all of these things designed to keep you on a shifting sand so that you never totally know exactly where home is. But with the pedal of the D underneath, constantly kind of giving a suspension of all of the things that are happening above. So that is nice. If you didn't have that reference point, it would feel like there wasn't as much suspense, if you know what I mean. Anyway, so what's happening here? We've got that feeling, and we're going either through, you could look at that as an E flat major chord, dropping to the D, which is a really lovely chord change. Or you could look at it, because we've got the C's in there in some places, you could look at it as a C minor still, with the minor seventh, then dropping to the D major. Both of those things work really well, kind of rising rather to the D major. And you'll see that the timing is all over the place. It's very, very loose. And that also helps with this kind of feeling of suspense and drifting, that kind of MIST sensation that I was going for. Again, here we've got our C minor chord here. We've also got some A and C action going on up here, which is giving you a really interesting thing. That could be C minor with the 13th, or it could be giving you the A minor with a flattened 5th, which kind of almost is like a diminished chord. There's no F sharp, but we've had the F sharp. It's all to play for. It's all kind of in that place, in that zone. And obviously that would be half diminished, I guess, because of the G here. So then we go through this kind of B flat type section here. You've got the B flat, the D and the F, and then we resolve to the A, and it gradually just kind of comes out. Now, having said all of that, what I'm doing is I'm splitting the chords very deliberately into fragments and putting them on different sounds. And the reason for that is that it gives you a more interesting journey for your ear as you hear things kind of drifting in and out. You'll see that there's loads and loads of controller information here. I'm using both the Modwheel to take me through the different dynamic layers in the samples, but I'm also using expression to give me a finer control over the overall volume of that part as well, so that everything is really as musically as possible, kind of swelling, having its moment and then dying away. And then things can kind of come and go within that. And that is really, the texture of that is really what it's all about. Anyway, I'll stop rabbiting. Let's have a listen. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to play you each of the sounds on their own, and then I'm going to talk about how I am effecting them and what I'm using on my kind of mix bus, also to create the sound world that I want the whole thing to inhabit. So let's jump straight up to the top here. Now, our first track here, let's pop the piano roll up so you can see that, is the traditional Evo, and it's the third Evo, which is the kind of what we've called the fractured Evo. Now, in the string section, you've got the elders here. You've got a classic octet and a traditional sextet, and the style of playing is different. So I've gone here with the traditional stuff over all of my higher strings because I want that slightly more curious performance style. So this sounds like this. Okay, let's check the rosin, no rosin sound rather, and the no rosin, self-explanatory, no rosin on the bow gives you a really kind of ethereal, very airy sound. That sounds like this. Now you get the sensation of the notes. You do hear the kind of ghost of the notes, but obviously most of the sound is that kind of very airy, breathy sound. Okay, so here we have the scattered tremolo, and that sounds like this. So again, it's relatively self-explanatory. It's each of the players just performing slightly aleatorically in their own timing, in their own way, and just feeling the ebb and flow as they play together. That's a really great sound. The other beauty of it is that it's so different across, across the keyboard on the different notes, that you can get these lovely undulating, it's not like a pre-scored thing where everyone's going 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, anything like that. It's very, very free. And so as you start to put chords down, you get even more of the kind of raindrop textures. Really, really lovely. Harmonics. And I love this idea, something that I shamelessly stolen from Christian, which is to kind of bring in the harmonics as part of the string band. And I'm not having them actually doubling exactly what's going on, but I am using them. Again, if I just compress this window slightly and we go back to the score view, if I click out of there, so the harmonics line is this one, this penultimate line down the bottom. And as you can see, most of the time, it is following, one of the other parts. And occasionally it will bring in its own note like this G here, which is then only mirrored an octave or 2 octaves rather down here. But most of the time it's kind of reinforcing the harmonics of what's going on. Like here, it kind of echoes the move up to F sharp. So it's a supplementary part, but it does sound really lovely when you allow it to deviate from what everyone else is doing just slightly and then go back again. The final thing, have I played that yet? Let me play that then. And again, because it's this traditional group and this kind of, the unwritten tradition, the way, the style of playing that is so characterful, it gives you a really lovely, kind of unearthly kind of feel, a very different sounding feel when you're just playing the same stuff that you might play on a normal harmonics patch. Now, this part needs no explanation in terms of its tonality. It's just a pedal note all the way through. But if I go here and we have a look in the controller lanes, you'll see the modulation is doing lots and lots and lots, and the expression is doing lots, and they're kind of following each other. I guess looking at this, I always do feel like my expression leads and then follows the dynamic change, the modulation change. I tend to find that my expression lives outside of the modulation lane. And I guess the reason for that is I start to shape the dynamic movement before I actually change the timbre of the instrument. It's just a personal taste thing, but I would really, really strongly recommend, if you're not familiar with using the expression and dynamic controls together, that you do experiment with that and find how you can express your musicality using the samples to the best effect using those two controllers. I can't emphasize how important it is that you use your controllers, and I would really recommend that if you don't have controllers on your keyboard, that you get something like an external controller, any kind of module that you can use. Some faders I would recommend rather than knobs, because it's easier to move multiple faders at the same time. It's so important to making something sound musical, and you really do need to practice this like you would practice any musical instrument. It's not as hard as learning how to play the violin, clearly, but there is a skill to it, there is an art to it, and practicing it just totally transforms the way that your samples sound. So I would strongly recommend anybody who doesn't already have controllers, I would strongly recommend to get some controllers. Now the bass just motors through, and I use the controllers to shape it and to bring it in and out. Now, what am I doing in terms of the production? Well, you'll see that I've got two buses. In fact, let me get the mixer window up. Bus 1 has a cinematic rooms. It's the Amethyst Hall It's just a 2.25 second. It's pretty much as it comes up, really simple, and that's just adding a beautiful sounding hall over everything. I'm leaving the certain amount of the reverb in the contact patches on because I'm going for this feeling. I'm going for this feeling of kind of blending lots of different sounds to get something. I'm not looking for a sense of you sit down and does it sound like you're sat in the room in front of an orchestra and the orchestra's playing. It's all about character. It's all about the vibe and the feel and just trying to get you into a really unique sound world. So there is nothing wrong with mixing different reverbs. You don't have to pick the one reverb that you're going to use on the sound. You can blend all of this stuff together and it sounds great. So that's the first cinematic rooms. The second one that I'm using is a super long. I've dialed it right up, 6.1 seconds, 6.2 seconds. Not anything else. I don't think I've changed anything else like the size or reflectivity or anything like that. All of those settings are still the same as far as I can see. Let's just double check that. Yep, all the same. And so all we're changing there is the reverb time. So I'm using that in a few places as the only reverb. So for example, on the scattered trems, it's the only reverb. But in a couple of places, I'm using it as a double reverb. So I've actually got 3 reverbs going on some of these tracks. Shock horror. It's a sacrilege, I know, but there you go. And then when we look down here, I've got this final one here, which is kind of weird send. I've called it Fatso Cathedral because it goes to the Fatso, first of all, which has got a kind of tape preset running. I think I may have tweaked just the input and the output, but essentially it's that preset, which I really like. And then it goes into a Gothic Cathedral in cinematic rooms again. Just a really, really good reverb, this one. I love all their stuff, Liquid Sonic stuff. This one is great. And then that, again, it gives you... what I'm doing actually is I'm beefing up the low end of the sound and then I'm sending it into the cathedral. So what you're getting from the cathedral verb is a slightly darker kind of feel, and that again for me that brings some fantastic atmosphere to proceedings. Now, if we are going to consider our verbs, I'm going to start the track going and then I'm going to switch these all off and bring them back in one by one, and you can see what they're all contributing. So you can hear there, the hall just gives you that added kind of glue, that kind of sensation of a space where everything is sitting together now. The hall long brings in the kind of depth to the sound and the kind of reach and a throw where suddenly we're now in a kind of suspension of disbelief. And then the fatso just gives you that kind of whopping, beautiful rounded low end. Now, what else is going on? So on the first track on these, this Evo, that's it. It's just the verb. Now here I've got a Neve, a UAD Neve plugin, channel strip plugin. I'm a real fan of with EQs and compressors and channel strips and things like that, of just diving straight in, thinking, what am I trying to achieve in my head? What kind of sound do I want? And if there's a preset that looks like it might deliver that sound, I'll try that first and then either use that as a basis. Sometimes I'll just rip it up and start again. But actually, you know, there's no shame in using a shortcut to get to the sound that you want. For me, it's very different from using presets on synths, or, you know, where you don't necessarily want to just be using the same sound that may be heard everywhere else. You want to just dial it in a little bit and make it your own. Now, this I regard as completely different. So here, we've got what is a kind of lead female vox. So I'm going to switch it on and off so you can hear the effect of this. In fact, I'll put this into solo. Okay, so for me, what the UAD is bringing, what this Neve sound is bringing, it's bringing a more presence to the mid range and also a kind of different shape to the air and a little bit kind of pushing the whole thing forward and making it's exaggerating the air sound in the sound, the kind of that, I want to say rosin, but I mean, you know, no rosin. So that's the idea of that sound. I've then used something very similar, if not exactly the same. Let's have a quick look on the scattered trams. I may have tweaked. Let's have a quick look and see if there is any difference here. So just putting those up next to each other, you can see that the main difference is that the limiter's not on. I think pretty much everything else is the same. I've got the same EQ on there. Yeah, I think at first glance everything else looks the same. And then going into the next track, the harmonics track, and just bringing that up next to that as well. And again, I'm using the same setting on there as well. So on the harmonics, if we have a quick listen to how that sounds, and we turn the EQ on and off. Okay, it's really interesting. I mean, there is an effect that you get even just by, you know, switching the modeling that's inherent in the plugin into the patch without having anything really active on it. There's still stuff going on under the hood. And what I'm doing is not, you know, I'm not doing very much. There's nothing really drastic going on in there, but it just adds a character to the sound. And all of these little very tiny tweaks really do add up to something quite significant. Now, I'm going to look at the bass now, and then we'll talk about the channel strip. So the bass is the one with the most extreme stuff going on, and that's because of this. It's feeding into the reverbs, to both of the reverbs. You've got to remember it's a single bass player, and this is the magic weapon of choice on here. I'll show you what this does. Let's switch it off. We like that. So what I'm doing is I'm dropping a bit of the direct sound and I'm bringing in this low air. And really, you know, it's the progeny, if that's the right word, you can correct me below, of the things like the old Dolby units. Were they called Dolby? There was a 120A, I think. I had one a long time ago. They were called subharmonic processors, and they basically looked at what was going on. You picked a frequency range that they worked around, and then they dialed in, you know, usually it was an octave below that, or that kind of thing. So you've got the same kind of thing here. You've got the range that you're operating on. You're adding in, you know, the low air and the low, I should probably read the manual. I'm one of those people who just likes to twist knobs until it sounds good. But basically, it's doing that thing. It's adding in subharmonics to the signal. So what we've taken is a single bass player, rather lonely bass player sitting in the studio, and turned them into this kind of portent and doom, which I just love. I think it's fantastic. So that's the stuff on there. Now, what else is going on? Well, if we go back to our rather curious looking way of busing here, you'll see I've got everything going into bus 256. Now that comes up here. First thing up here is an IO, and I've got this going through some outboard. What have I got it going through? I've got it going through my API 5500 EQ, and that is a simple 2 dB high and low. It's just a smiley face just to give me a little bit of extra bottom and a little bit of extra top. It then goes into an SSL-G compressor. Again, it's just based on the 4000, I think it was, the desk G series compressor. And that then goes into the Overstayer MAS, which is a harmonic distortion saturation generator. What does all that stuff add? Well, let's turn everything off on the channel strip, and we'll deal with this lot first. So let's have a listen. Okay, so the G series compressor is not doing much. I think it might just like, there might be the tiniest thing when the bass really kicks in halfway through. It just does a little wobble there. So it's not really doing much. It's just, I love the sound of it. I love the sound of putting things through it. Again, it adds some sort of mojo. So, you know, and you could accomplish the same thing with a plugin as well. The EQ is just doing the smiley face thing. So it's giving me a little bit more air and a little bit more bottom end. And I think if you hear, and you might want to jump back 20 seconds to have another listen, especially in the bit where I last switched it in, you'll hear that the low mid becomes richer when I switch the circuit back in. And that's because of the MAS. And again, that's a harmonic saturation or distortion thing. There's loads of plugins that accomplish the same thing. That is a really fun and good thing to add to your master channel. What else is going on here? I've got this. This is a thing that I shamelessly stole from Greg Wells from one of his walkthroughs probably on Mix with the Masters, which I would thoroughly recommend. If you haven't checked that stuff out yet, there is some amazing information in there, where you can you're basically sitting looking over the shoulder of the best, mix and producers and mix engineers on the face of the earth. This is something that I nicked from him, and it's just a way of getting just a tiny bit more stereo width on things. That's followed up by this Fairchild, the UAD Fairchild. And again, that's really it's not doing a huge amount, but it's just adding some vibe. And then finally, I've got the old Oxford Inflator, which again, was something that I had forgotten about for ages and ages and ages. And then it just suddenly came back into my head. I was like, oh, I remember that. Another kind of harmonic toy to play with. So I'm going to play back, and I'm going to gradually add them in and take them out so that you can see what each one adds at each stage to the process. Okay, so I think you can see there's not a huge... the thing that introduces the biggest level change is, I guess, the Fairchild introduces a little bit of a level change, but not huge. And the Oxford Inflator is a really weird one. It feels like it's introduced a huge level change. And sometimes depending on the frequency range you've got going into it, you either get a level change or you don't, but it just fills out the kind of middle of what you've got going on and just adds a little bit more sparkle to things. So it's a funny one. It depends on what you're putting into it, according to whether you need to, mod the level coming out of it. But I think that if you listen through that, nevertheless, you can see what each thing is subsequently adding to the overall as you get to the, to the final thing. Now, what about this little funny thing here? I've got something going here, sending after all this stuff, going to 255. Well, where is 255? Here it is. It's my fatso. So again, that is that kind of really low, kind of big pumpy bottom end business. And I've got that just going to the stereo out. So these then, it's almost like a parallel processing. So that goes into the stereo outs. And then the final thing is just the L2, which is just controlling the overall level. And also, for some reason, I do like the sound of that L2. But let's have a look at our fatso and our verby thing, and then we will switch that on and off as well. So again, it's not an enormously dramatic change that happens when we switch that in, but it just, again, adds some vibe. And like I said, there's I've started doing a lot of this parallel thing. It's something that I've seen in Greg's Mix with the Masters, but also it's something that, the kind of Browerization. So if you Google that, that's a kind of way of having multiple mix buses and then using parallel processing on some of those. So taking your drums, for example, and then sending them to a parallel processing channel that has some of this stuff like the fatso and, things to just add vibe that you can then blend in. And while it seems like it's a huge amount of grief to go through to kind of put all these millions of things on, and I mean, it's not that many on this, but to putting all these extra things on, what it does is it helps you to create a sound world. It helps you to create a vibe in the sound that you just don't have, if you just use the instruments and you just play them straight and just maybe put a little bit of reverb on. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm trying to do here is I was trying to create a picture. And I think that when you are trying to get to a certain place where you're trying to create a kind of psychological picture for the listener, a lot of this stuff is really, really useful because it gives us the sensation of, if you've ever been in a huge cathedral or, a giant cave or something like that, and you hear the way that different frequencies react, these kind of things have a visceral effect on your experience of the moment. And so what I'm trying to do in a kind of hack science kind of way is to try and get to that visceral experience by doing weird things like, let's kind of add a bit of that feeling of being in a huge reverberant cathedral or a dark sort of empty space, and see where we get to. So that is the demo that I've just walked through for Albion Solstice. I hope that some of that was useful. I hope some of these ideas you can take and work into your own productions. and I'll keep doing this kind of stuff. I've also got some really interesting old stuff which I've always wanted to go back and have another look at, things that I've done years ago for Little Big Planet and things like that. So I'd delve into the archive at some point and start opening up some older sessions and see where that takes me, if I can get them to still load up, of course. But in the meantime, let me know if this was useful, if there's any areas that you want me to look into more, and I will be putting more stuff up soon. Thanks very much for watching. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.